Okay, so I just finished installing one of my 3D printed by, I believe it was Cockroach Fabrication, or I can't remember exactly, but it was a Wasco on the NC Facebook group. But one of his 3D printed fender vents. Excuse the finish on this. This has been sanded back, filler primered, and then epoxy primed on top that I still need to sand back and then put a top coat of a 2K satin black on it. But tools that I recommend are a set of calipers, masking tape of course, fender vent, a file, paint pen or marker or Sharpie, rotary tool, be it Dremel or my personal preference is a Proxxon. Optional stuff, but I highly recommend, is some vinyl, and then a finger sander. This is just a cheap Harbor Freight finger sander. Grits don't really matter, you're just going to use that for the vinyl kind of chasing up to the line. But first step that I always recommend is mask up the front face, so the covering area here. Mask up the front area and create a template. So, like so. Create a template for that. Then, after you've masked it off and cut it out, move back about 8 mil from the edge, trim it back. I used the calipers and just went along the edge of the line and masked up and redrew it. The optional vinyl, what I did is I took this and cut it out onto some vinyl, so that way I don't have to work with this kind of coming apart and fraying. Just off of personal experience, I found that happens when you try and peel it back. Also, the vinyl is a bit more forgiving in following the curves, but do that. Then let's move on to, well, first step of actually working on the car is mask up the front end. Key point to note when you are masking up the front end, or at least for just laying it out, leave the front edge of the fender here exposed, just because that is your datum for the rearward positioning, and leave the front edge here exposed as well, because that is your left and right positioning. So first start off for going back, you are going to go 13¼ centimeters, so 132.5 millimeters. That's what I went off with my calipers, and then 14¼ centimeters going in from the edge where you have your, where you have your line going out here. You'll align that corner with the corner of the template you've made. So I'll go ahead and lay those lines out and give you guys a shot of how that goes. Okay, so I have the 132.5 millimeter gap marked out here from the edge of the fender here over to back there, and then 142.5 out to here. Again, that's millimeters. You're going from centimeters to millimeters. You know the difference. Basic metric system stuff. I try to be very precise with this, just because with fitment, because the measurements I went off of over here, you are working with a compound curve. So you have a curve here along the edges, and then you also have a slight radius on both ends of both corners here and here that you have to kind of work with. So the more precise you can get it, the better fitment you're going to get to work with. I still have a little bit of work to work with on mine. It's a little bit lifting in some portions, but nothing a little bit of double-sided tape and a little bit more time with the sander won't fix. But once you get this corner datum right here, you can take your template, go off of your corner datum again, put your corner datum there, and then line it up on your flat edge there, going across to the 132.5 mil going across, and then using the corner right there for your 142.5 millimeter datum there. Then just take this, stick it down, so that way you have a template to outline and then work with for cutting. And that, kids, is why you always double check your datums. I applied my little template and something didn't quite seem right, so went back, double checked my datum, and I was off by maybe a 1/16 of an inch, or probably like 2 or 3 mil. Something didn't seem right there, so remeasured my outside datum and I was off by a bit. Also went back and double checked my back to forward datum, and it was pretty close and pretty much within margin of error with the calipers. Good there, but remember, always double check your measurements. Okay, so after rechecking that datum and futzing with the template, again, I've probably taken this particular template off at least 3 or 4 times just to get it aligned properly, but following my bottom front to back datum on that line there, then using the 14.25 centimeter datum out there to align it with the corner there. Then looking down the profile, it looks like we are actually in line with the little crest of the Fender radius, but also if you kind of just look down the front of the car, it should be about straight. Any wavering in the line is from the template, not so much from the alignment, but also that little wavering, that's within the margin of kind of getting it fine-tuned with the sander. So going from there, that's about our idea for the cut. What I'm going to do now is take the paint marker, stipple a line all the way around here, so that way I can reuse the template if needed, or have this for reference just in case. I might see if I can scan these on the printer for anyone else's use or anything like that. But let me just go ahead and stipple this edge. And then also I'm going to, since we've already figured out our masking and our templating, you can now mask up the rest of the fender, so that way you can protect the rest of your paint. Okay, so after masking up some additional areas, what I've done here is I've just masked off a lot of the area that goes into the bumper area, again covering the datums we used previously. Again, why leave them exposed when you're actually marking stuff out. Doing a bit over the hood here to kind of prevent stuff from getting in the engine bay. But this is what I mean by stippling. So I'm taking the paint marker and not running it along the edge, but just essentially stippling and adding a whole bunch of dots along the edge, so that way I'm not interfering with the actual template itself. If you run the actual marker along the edge, you might be able to kind of pull it and misposition it. By stippling it and pushing down, you're putting down a thicker layer of whatever marking method you've chosen, a Sharpie, or in my case, my preference is a paint marker. But if you stipple it down, you're putting down a thicker and more visible layer for laying it out and actually laying out your template. But to give you an idea of what I mean by that, I'll go ahead and peel this back. Again, another reason why I prefer using vinyl for this is I have a consistent template to reference off of, so I don't need to worry about messing up. Well, again, this is reusable almost, so I can take this and lay it down somewhere. The other template I actually laid down on some plastic, but to give you an idea of what you get when you stipple it. So you get a little bit of that bleed through, you're gonna get some of that, but you actually still have a very clean, crisp line to go off of. So by having that, what I also recommend is add some tape around the periphery, not right up against it, because you're gonna be cutting up to that line. Just add it up around there just in case your Dremel tool or rotary tool slips a bit, or when you're going back and refining with the file to kind of get straight edges, so that way you don't have the file skate and hit the fender. Ask me how I know. But yeah, so let's go ahead and start with that, and I'll go ahead and add some additional masking tape and start cutting. Okay, so with that additional tape line laid out, again, this is your last chance to back out, or your last chance to double check all of your measurements. So go ahead, take your vent, loosely position it on your cutting marks. So kind of loosely position it, get an idea that you are in fact positioned correctly. Again, it doesn't fit the contour on the bottom half to begin with, but at least roughly position it and then eyeball it. To me, this looks just about right. Let's see again. Yeah, to me that looks like it's just about right. It is following the contours you are going to have a bit more. So if you look at the back, there actually is a small protrusion right there. So you are going to have to cut back further than you think versus right there. So keep that in mind. That's again why you're going to use a template that you cut off the top and then go in, I believe it was 8 millimeters. So that way you can compensate for your kind of surround and the edge there. So that way you're cutting just enough, or you're creating your template to be the correct size, and then you can refine it to get proper fitment and a nice snug fit, so that way you're not cutting out too much. But I'll go ahead and do our primary first pass just to scribe our line with the cutoff wheels, and then I'll bring you back for that. So yeah. Okay, so this is what cutting our first kind of groove in there is going to look like. I always recommend doing that whenever you're cutting out a panel or an area where you're going to want to have good kind of cutoff lines and accuracy in the cuts. I always recommend to take your rotary tool and just go along, stipple a line in, well, of course while it's running, but go ahead and kind of stipple a line in so that way it's easier to follow and you don't have to worry about it kind of drifting around and going back and forth or whatever. It'll follow its own kind of path that you've already cut in. It also makes it easier to establish your kind of your tolerance. I go about 1.5 mil away from the line, just so that one, there is going to be a certain level of that cut line increasing in width, because as you actually cut through, you're going to be wearing material on both sides of that scribe as you go. And also, just to give yourself more tolerance, you're going to have some wandering still. It's going to mitigate some of it by doing a scribe line, but again, you're going to want to give yourself more tolerance than you think you need, because it's always better to sneak up on your line than to try and go balls out and go for it right on the first pass. Plus, that's how you end up with poor fitment and poor tolerances. So always want to sneak up on your lines and actually get nice snug fitment, so you don't have to worry as much about the vent coming out while you're driving or hitting a pothole and having it just pop out. Ideally, you might be able to run this without having any form of adhesive. I wouldn't do that personally. I'm debating on whether or not I want to use double-sided tape on my particular vents, or if I want to try something else like potentially a body epoxy or some form of panel adhesive. I think that's a bit overkill for me personally, because I'd like to be able to remove these at some point in the future, be it if I paint the car, wrap the car, or anything else along the lines. Again, kind of scribe your line, go slowly. Also, when you cut through, try to leave a little bit of, try to leave the corners till the very last, so that way you don't have a giant panel that's just vibrating the entire time. Makes it nicer for whoever's around you, and also makes it easier to cut, because therefore you're saving the last tiny bit for the more or less the most difficult part of removing the central panel. But yeah. Okay, so here we've got our cutout section right here. I had to switch out to my other Dremel tool because I kept on breaking these cutoff wheels, which I actually prefer because they are thinner. They break a bit more often, but I prefer them because they're a bit thinner kerf, and yeah, I just prefer the cut. It seems like they generate less heat, and these are quite a bit thicker, and I don't feel as if I have as much control over this tool. It tends to want to jump around, and yeah, which because of that, I also ended up having a little bit of a burn through. We'll see at the end if whether or not I got into the paint here. I didn't, but anyway, we'll get around to that a little bit later. Again, another reason why you should have an additional tape layer there, just for things like that. But moving on, so we have our cut done. Don't do that what I just did, because you'll get a whole bunch of metal shavings in your fingernails, or you'll cut your hand open. But what we're going to do now is inspect our lines. I'm going to go ahead and take a file to this just to kind of deburr it and get a better look at where we are in relation to our template. But After that, we'll bust out the finger sander and start creeping up on our lines. Okay, quick little deburr later, and we've got about 1/2 mil, and we're very close right here to where we want to be, but finger sander will make quick work of this. But again, creeping up on our lines. That's the big key here, and we'll probably go right up to the lines here and then do a test fit, because I know for a fact from that side, going right up to the line isn't quite fitting yet, which is exactly what you want. So we'll actually go ahead and bust out the finger sander, run along our edges, and then I'll bring you back when we're going to do our first test fit. Okay, so I've cleaned up the edge, kind of snuck up on our edge here. Unfortunately, finger sander went through 3 belts and them all out. So went ahead and opted to use the Dremel again with a grinding wheel, which is not my preferred method, just because it does not leave the most even finish or an even cut, and it's even more likely to leave dings like that in your panel. But I'm impatient and don't want to go to the hardware store to pick up more belts, which, to be quite honest, after going through all of that, having that happen and filing it back, I might just go and say screw it and go there, just because. Remember, just take breaks, people. I might be overheating the panel. There's a burr on the inside because I'm using the grinding wheel, which is not fun to have to clean up. But even still, again, so after doing all that, we still don't have it fitting, which again is what you want, because you want a snug fitment. But if we look here, we are inside there, and we're about, I don't know, I'd say maybe 1 mil out, 1 mil, 1/2 mil out. So needs a bit on each side, I'd say. If you're going to err on grinding, I would say grind on the outside, just because you want to have a bit more space for that inside edge there to kind of follow that contour, versus pushing it further in. You might have more of a gap there. But again, kind of roughly eyeball it in like so, and then check your fitment and alignment. Looks like we're in line there. Got a bit to come off on each side there. And let's check the back. Looks like we're out of alignment there. So more than likely, I'm going to be taking a bit more out of the top edge there. But you kind of look and get a rough idea. Kind of wedge it in to push it forward, which I would not recommend for actually installing it, because you're going to put strain on the plastic. But you kind of do that. Push it forward a bit, and check your alignment going back. Let's see. Focus, you fuck.
It's a busman. Focus, you fuck. Ha! Works every time.
There we go. Look there. Looks like our alignment there is good. And go over the top. It would appear like our alignment there is good. Check on the back edge here. Alignment there looks good, and alignment towards the back could be better, but we'll fix that later. Anyway, that's the gist of it. I am going to take a quick little break and possibly run to the hardware store, get some more of those belts. Okay, so next test fit, we are actually sitting nearly all the way in. We have a nice fitment along the edge here, along that edge, nice and good, but we're sitting proud in the back. So probably not gonna be able to see it in there, but you'll see a little step. That is, so if we pop this out, and you'll actually be able to see the kind of nice fitment we're getting. Slip out there, good, making nice solid contact all along the edge there. Good, which is what we're looking for, is to have a solid edge or a solid contact along the edges here. But what that is we have this step in the back here. That is likely what is keeping us from sinking it all the way flush. So for that, we're likely going to have to bring this section right here back further. And chase down this corner to be a nice angle, or nice and, I don't want to say square, it's not a 90-degree angle, but you kind of get the idea. But of course, always look at your vent. You'll see right on the side right here, we're getting some friction, but it looks like it's actually making it past just a touch. But just to be safe, we'll kind of chamfer that out. But right here, we're not seeing any contact. We are probably sitting on it right there if you look close. Look close right there. Yeah, you'll see we're making contact right there. We need to take down that corner a bit more. I'm going to opt to do this with the file instead of the finger sander, mainly just to get a bit more accuracy, but you get the basic idea. I might, if it takes too long, I might grab the rotary tool again, just kind of try and true that up a bit. But after this, we probably should have a flush fitting vent, and we can peel back our tape, but maybe do a little bit of deburring on the inside there still, just to be safe. Anyway. Okay, and just like that, with those few little corrections, we are sitting pretty much flush all the way around. Which means all we've got left to do, peel back the tape. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll show you guys the finished result. Okay, paint peeled back, and with that tape, did I say paint? Whatever. With the tape peeled back, you can actually see here are some areas where we've actually burned through the paint, which is due to using a grinding wheel. It generates a lot more heat, so we have burned through the paint. But in every other area where we didn't use the grinding wheel, aka we used the finger sander, we have not burned through the paint. So another case for using that. Okay, so corners are nice and relatively square. So that is our finger sander corner, which I did file back a bit, but that is a risky run with using the finger sander in corners. But with a file, you can get a nice crisp corner, which makes it easier to fit up and less likely to cause issues. But yep, let me go ahead and do some things, but I'll pop this in. Okay, so that's fully seated pretty much. Got a little bit of a lift in the back corner here. A little bit of a lift, but within margin. Same with here, it's kind of rocking. Might just sand that little area down a bit just to give it a bit of flatter surface, but for the most part, all this stuff should be well within margin for some double-sided tape to hold it down, because it's pretty solidly in there. It's probably not even necessary to use the double-sided tape, but that's just mainly for fitment purposes. But now all I gotta do, give this a quick scuff back and hit it with the 2K satin black, and it'll be done. Oh, and also cut the inside, but that's it. Okay, it's been about a day or two later, but freshly repainted with the 2K satin black with the correct kind of orange peel I was going for, somewhat to match my vent, the 997 GT3 stock plastic vent. It's a little bit deeper black, but no big deal. The plastic textures match. Okay, so last thing is to fit it back up with my double-sided tape, but also trim out your intersection. Just take a Sharpie, match up your cut lines, and reinstall. I'll go ahead and do that, and then get you guys back in here for that final fit up. Okay, with that being cut out, the inner fender liners are cut out. Not sure you can see into the tire there. Can you? Maybe. Yeah, there you go. You can see into the tire there. The double side tape has been applied. Fitting on the front seems pretty good. It has added some thickness to the sides, so you can see a little bit additional thickness there. I mean, honestly, for some additional security and these not flying out going down the road, I'll take it. But this side as well, all good. Seem to match the front end of the car pretty well. But that's pretty much it. My preference, or the idea I went for cutting them out, was just using some tin snips. That's it. Pretty simple. If you got this far, you're pretty sure you could figure something out. But yeah, that's the install. Hope this was helpful and they actually got some decent information out of it. Best of luck.